All right. Welcome to the Cincinnati Asian Art Society's November 23rd, 2025 program. I'm Helen Rinsberg, President of the Society. Our program today is Teatime, Chinese Enamels from the Taft Collection, an exhibition that celebrates the art and culture of tea. Thanks to a generous donation to the Taft in 2014, the museum is home to dozens of 18th century Chinese painted enamel teapots, cups, saucers, and accessories, allowing for an exploration of this beloved beverage. Our distinguished presenter is Anne Glasscock. She'll share with us highlights from this very colorful exhibit. Dr. Anne Glasscock has been a part of the curatorial team of the Taft Museum since 2018. Specializing in decorative arts and furniture, she contributes to various aspects of the museum's operation, including curating exhibitions and conducting research on the permanent collection. Prior to the Taft, she worked for the Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, Wisconsin, Chipstone Foundation in Milwaukee, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She also spent several years in the auction house field and worked as a specialist in the Silver and Objects de Virtu and English and Continental Decorative Arts departments at Freeman's in Philadelphia. In 2019, Anne received a doctorate from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where she completed her dissertation, Hudson Reuscher, Silversmith, Designer, Craftsman, which explored Reuscher's participation in the revival of ecclesiastical silver in post-war America. Anne earned a bachelor's from Indiana University, Bloomington, Master of Letters from Christie's Education, London, and a Master's in Art History from Temple University. She also attended the Addingham Summer School and the Dresden International Academy for the Arts. And she is our top vote getter in our YouTube channels. Well, if you remember, she did that wonderful program on Chinese porcelains here at the museum, and it currently has 4,000 views. So, yes, I can't wait till this one gets up. Anne.
All right, thank you, Helen, and thank you to the Asian Art Society for bringing me here today. It's going to be really hard to not touch this cord, but I'll do the best that I can. So thank you for that generous introduction. I'm excited to talk about Teatime, Chinese Enamels from the Taft Collection today. But before I do that, since we are at the Taft, I'm allowed to brag about the exhibitions that we have on display right now and the exhibitions that are coming up. So if you haven't seen Indigo and the Art of Quilt Making, it's on display until January 11th. Next up, we have Rembrandt Masterpieces in Black and White, and these are works that come from will come from the Rembrandt House Museum in Amsterdam, and that'll be next in the main exhibition gallery. In Sinton, after Teatime closes, we'll have our Duncanson Artist in Residence, Beyond the Picturesque, paintings by Iana Ross. And then after Rembrandt, we're going to have the Scandinavian Home. This is a show that I'm working on. Really fantastic exhibition. It's coming from the Frick Pittsburgh, has tapestries, paintings, furniture, silver, ceramics. It's just going to be really gorgeous. Thank you for the oohs and ahs. I'm excited too. And then Unfolding Elegance, European Fans from the Taft Collection, will be on display in the Sinton Gallery. This is another show that I'm curating. These fans have been in storage for decades, and we are working on getting them conserved right now, so they're going to be really beautiful. This one has been conserved already, so it's brighter than what you see here. There are these beautiful birds on the back. It's just fantastic, so I'm excited about that show. And then this is another show I'm co-curating with our fellow curators here, Edie Harper, Modernist at Play. So I think a lot of you have probably heard of Charlie Harper. Edie Harper was his wife, and she is an artist that deserves recognition. She's a serious artist, also a fun artist. She painted this image here. It's the inspiration for an Artworks mural. You've probably seen it. And then this is her in the lower left with her cat Katrinka. who was the inspiration for this painting. So she not only created paintings, but also weavings and enamels and prints and photographs, and we're going to cover all of that and give her the recognition that she deserves. Okay, so back to tea time. So first we're going to talk about Chinese painted enamels, just in general, just to give you a review of these objects. Then we'll talk about tea time specifically, and then because we're here and because we're all decorated for the holidays, I thought I'd talk about All Set for Afternoon Tea, which is a display we have up in the dining room. And sorry, the words kind of came down on the images. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so Chinese painted enamels. This is a picture of a range of the 89 enamels that were given to the Taft in 2014. So it's quite the treasure trove, and it came from the bequest of the late Reverend Compton Allen. And it forms one of the largest known public collections of Chinese painted enamels in the world. They're right here at the Taft, which is very exciting. So aside from about a half dozen pieces that are on display in Tiny Treasures gallery upstairs, these pieces remain in storage until we're ready to do an exhibition like Tea Time. So I pulled out just 2 of these 89 works of art to look at for just a minute. And I want to do that because for me, these are a great group of objects to talk about because they are mostly functional pieces that we can all relate to. For example, there are teapots and coffee pots in the collection, and I think these are good, kind of conversation starters because it's probably safe to say that we either drink coffee and or tea, both of which were considered exotic a few hundred years ago, and I'll talk more about that later. But again, I just think these are relatable objects, so just kind of keep that in mind as you experience the exhibition, and maybe you can even make some personal connections. So before I get into some of the specifics of the objects and the specifics of the objects in Tea Time, I do want to provide some background on Chinese painted enamels and how they bridge 2 of museum founders, Charles and Anna Taft's favorite collecting areas, and that's Chinese porcelain and French enamel. So the Tafts acquired about, go back for a second, 200 Chinese porcelains and about 90 Renaissance enamels made in Limoges, France. And the Chinese enamels span and link these 2 collections through a little-known historical connection, which I will discuss shortly. So first, let's look at the French enamels. Workshops of skilled artisans in Limoges, France, developed the technique of painted enamel around 1500. Painted enamels are made by fusing layers of colored glass paste onto metal. In other words, an enameler applies liquefied enamel to a metal surface, usually copper, much like paint applied to a canvas. So about 200 years later, after painted enamel was introduced in France, it appeared in China. By this time, Limoges enamels had largely fallen out of fashion in Europe, but a few French workshops were still active. Contact between the East and the West increased in the 1600s and 1700s as major maritime trade routes were established. Along with goods for trade, Europeans brought many objects to China as a tribute for the emperor and members of the court of Beijing. For example, in 1687, Jesuit missionaries sent by Louis XIV of France presented a gift of Limoges enamels to the Kangxi emperor. The Jesuits also probably brought Limoges enamels with them in the form of religious plaques as teaching aids or teaching and conversion aids. Some of these missionaries were also artists and stayed in China to create painted enamels, or they trained Chinese artisans to paint the scenes, various scenes of European life. European prints were also used as teaching tools and for inspiration for subject matter. And the finer examples were usually those executed for the Chinese, like the emperor. So often artist skills or techniques are passed from east to west, but this is an occasion where that was reversed, so west from east. Okay, so to members of the Chinese court, these strange new painted enamels resembled Chinese porcelain. So they called them Yangtze, meaning foreign porcelain. The Kangxi Emperor was so intrigued with this unfamiliar technology that he set up workshops in Beijing and employed European artists to teach the technique to Chinese artisans. At the beginning of the 1700s, Chinese artists were already familiar with champleve and cloisonné enamel techniques, which had arrived in China a few hundred years earlier from the Middle East. The Chinese had also become highly proficient in using low-fired enamel paints to decorate porcelain. Still, it was difficult to translate these skills. Successfully covering an large area of smooth copper, like this dish here, with painted enamel is difficult. Copper and enamel expand at different rates while being fired, which can cause the enamel surface to warp, crack, and you have to use many different colors, which requires multiple firings. So it's not an easy process. Okay. However, by the 1720s, workshops in Beijing, bless you, and Guangzhou, also known as Canton, had mastered the process and began producing their own Chinese painted enamels. The production of painted enamel intersected in many ways with more established practices for making porcelain. Both enamels and porcelain were made in some of the same shapes and were decorated with similar imagery. And I just wanted to show you this slide to demonstrate that some of the Chinese enamel tea and coffee pots, as well as other objects, were often modeled after their Western counterparts in silver. So this is a quote-unquote lighthouse coffee pot, which was made in England. And you can see the resemblance here. And often European merchants would request these shapes. Chinese artisans created porcelain and enamel versions of these popular shapes throughout the 18th century for export to Europe. And then speaking of export wear, one popular trend among elite Europeans was to commission servingware decorated with the family coat of arms, which you can see an example of that in the upper right-hand corner. This is just right below the keyhole. So a family member probably commissioned a middleman to order this box, which was custom made with the family emblem from a Chinese workshop. As the fashion for consuming new exotic beverages such as tea, coffee, and chocolate took off in Europe and the Americas in the 18th century, so did the demand for appropriately exotic servingware. So a porcelain teapot, which is not shown here, and an enamel tray in the upper right-hand corner is decorated with the same coat of arms as the Taft's tea caddy. And it exists in other collections, but these pieces likely originated from a matching tea service. So these matching sets started to become really popular. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the works of art in Teatime. How many of you have seen this show already? Excellent. Well, you're here, so I expect you to see it after the talk today, or it's up through March 22nd, so you have plenty of time. Okay, so Teatime is a self-organized show. It was organized here at the Taft. It features 24 works from the collection that are part of that 89 group that I mentioned earlier. And as always, you can see a selection of these works year-round in the Tiny Treasures Gallery. So I've pulled out the teapot and the tea caddy from this display, so there are a couple new things and tiny treasures that you can see as well. Okay, so now you might know that the Taft has a long history with tea, from how we decorate the dining room during the holidays, to the Chinese porcelains and enamels in the collection, to our afternoon tea offerings. So it seemed fitting that we put together an exhibition about tea. Not to mention, I really love tea. I have it pretty much every day. And I wanted to tell its story through the Chinese enamels in our collection and just bring out some of these really beautiful works of art. So how did I tell that story in the gallery? So once you go in, you'll first learn about the discovery of tea. So according to legend, the mythical Chinese emperor Shennong discovered tea in 2737 BCE. One autumn day, he stopped for a drink of water, which he heated to purify. With a hot drink in his hand, he sat down next to what just happened to be a small tea tree. Unbeknownst to the emperor, several leaves fell from above and just so happened to land in his water. Delighted by the flavor, he enjoyed the first cup of tea. So it's perfect. You know, it's magical, but I love the story nonetheless. But tea wasn't always consumed or enjoyed this way. It was once used medicinally, still is sometimes today. It was also eaten as a vegetable, as cooked in grain porridge. It only shifted from food to drink about 1,500 years ago, when people realized that this combination of heat and moisture could create these really complex and varied tastes out of these leafy greens. And thank goodness for them. So where did tea come from? So all tea leaves originate from one plant, Camellia sinensis, which is native to southeast China. And there are several types of tea, including white, green, oolong, and black, amongst others. And teas vary according to how the leaves are processed. So they can be withered, rolled, roasted, etc. And then the level of oxidation, or the exposure to oxygen and moisture. So green, for example, you see in that second slot there, is quickly heated to stop oxidation, which preserves its color. Whereas the leaves used to make black tea are fully oxidized and they turn dark. So Chinese tea growers kept the process of making tea very much a secret until about 1850. It was then that the British East India Company commissioned Robert Fortune, a Scottish botanist and expert on Chinese plants, to obtain living tea plants. So he disguised himself as a Chinese merchant. He smuggled 2,000 tea plants and 17,000 seeds, as well as Chinese workers, with knowledge of tea cultivation and processing to British-controlled northern India. So he also discovered that green and black teas were produced by the same plant, disproving 18th century Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, who was really convinced that the different species of plants were involved when making tea. So one that gave us green tea and one that gave us black tea. So at the time, no one in Europe or the Americas knew the differences were really in the processing. So that roasting, the oxidation, that sort of thing. So as you can see here, this Robert Fortune, the Tea Thief, it is a documentary film. I have the trailer, I just wanted to show you guys. I'm embarrassed to say I have not had a chance to watch the whole documentary. It's an hour, but you know, it seemed like it got into some pretty great film festivals. But I can't I can't vouch for it. It could be problematic, it could be wonderful, it could be dramatic, it could be dull. I have no idea. But go home and watch it, and I will do the same thing.
For thousands of years, China fiercely guarded the secret of tea's cultivation and manufacture. The British Empire sought to change that in 1848 by mounting one of the most audacious espionage missions ever undertaken, to enter forbidden China and steal the secret of tea. The man they entrusted with this mission was a 36-year-old Scottish botanist.
The net revenues from the China tea trade to the East India Company in 1800 exceeded those of its Indian empire, effectively. The East India Company ruled over something like a quarter of world's trade and 20% of the population of the planet. That's like Microsoft, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and about 20 others rolled into one.
I could hardly wait to communicate my findings. Medicinal teas are produced from tea trees of the same variety as other non-medicinal teas, and the quality of the tea depends upon the quality of the soil and climate where it is grown. If the seeds I had collected were grown successfully in our nurseries in the Himalayas, they would produce excellent teas. The risks I had taken travelling here incognito would have been fully rewarded.
The East India Company authorised him to write a book of his travels in China. Fortune produced a romanticised account, deleting carefully all the details that could compromise his secret activities. Subtly demystifying the aura surrounding Chinese tea, Fortune also prepared British readers to the idea of drinking tea from other places. Britain abruptly stopped buying tea from China and halted the opium trade. The Chinese tea industry collapsed. Imperial Chinese rule, then in severe decline, had no means by which to react, and the nation's economy was devastated. Equally clouded in mystery is that the best of Indian tea is still produced from Chinese tea plants stolen by Fortune.
Yeah, so go home, check it out. Seems like it's an interesting story. I've come across multiple people that have lectured on it. So yeah, just a fascinating history to learn about that's connected with our very own tea leaves. Okay, so we'll go back up into the exhibition here and talk about some of the objects that are on display. But first, let me just say that although the enamels in Teatime were made in China, they were probably intended for Western buyers, like Catherine of Braganza, more on her in a second, as the passion for tea spread from China to Europe and America in the 1700s. So we're going to look at the pieces in the show in that context. So Dutch merchants first began importing tea into Europe in the early 1600s. Not long after, in 1662, King Charles II of England married the Portuguese noblewoman Catherine of Braganza. And don't they look happy here? You think with all that wealth, you have a smile on your face, but I digress. So she brought her love of tea to the English court, and the beverage quickly became popular with the aristocracy, and eventually the craze for tea permeated Western society. So at that point, China still held a virtual monopoly on the world's tea trees, making tea one of the 3 essential Chinese export goods, along with porcelain and silk. Of course, Westerners not only wanted tea leaves, they wanted teapots and cups and saucers and accessories. So today, the works in Teatime help tell the story of tea's roots in China and how it became all the rage in 18th century Europe and America. So as I mentioned, tea drinking became popular among the elite and middle class in Europe. First at exclusive social gatherings, and then more routinely in domestic settings, as depicted here in the tea party. So here we have a family taking tea, even the small child drinking caffeinated tea, I don't know, makes you wonder. Similarly, wealthy American colonists who received shipments of tea as early as 1717 enjoyed the hot brew either at local establishments or in the comfort of their homes. And we have some fun recreations here. Okay, so let's look at some objects. So the first case up in the Cincinnati gallery shows works that are used to store tea. So in the 18th century, tea, again, one of the main exports from China and a luxury good in the West. Remember, it was still rare and expensive at this time. Tea was often stored in a special container known as a caddy. So caddies helped preserve the tea's freshness and equipped with a lock prevented theft. And many large caddies also held sugar, another expensive commodity. So as you know, over time, the price of tea decreased, making it available to all levels of society. So on the front of this caddy, an attendant brings tea to a lady and gentleman, evoking its purpose. The colorful box holds 3 canisters, 1 each for green and black tea, and then a third for sugar. And then for added convenience, the circular lids on top of the tea canisters could be removed and then used for measuring out the tea leaves for brewing. And then, stay here for a second. And then the high cost of tea and sugar, as I mentioned, prompted the owner of this caddy, who's an English family, as we learned earlier, to store the contents under lock and key. So the next case looks at serving and drinking tea. So during the Ming Dynasty, Chinese tea drinkers began steeping whole leaves, as opposed to whisking powdered tea with hot water in a bowl. So this new process required the perfect brewing vessel, the teapot. So based on the form of Chinese wine ewers, teapots required close-fitting lids to retain heat, narrow spouts that acted as strainers, and then handles to comfortably pour the hot liquid. So by the 1700s, the Western craze for tea was in full force, leading to thousands of objects just like these being shipped to Europe and America. So some teapots were designed with a lattice of holes at the base of the spout to really kind of contain the steeped tea leaves from going down the spout and getting into your tea. But for those that were not, a strainer, much like this one, which is really beautiful, painted with flowers and butterflies, was used to separate smaller or chopped leaves, kept them from getting into that hot water. So the strainer likely rested on top of the teapot in that opening and could be easily removed to prevent oversteeping, which Westerners had the habit of doing. I'll talk about this in a second, but in the West, the water was often boiled very hot. The tea leaves were steeped for longer than what might be done in Chinese culture, and so that the tea got bitter, and so then that sugar was needed, and so it was just kind of a chain reaction there. That strainer also could have been used to strain punch. This was a popular 18th century drink made from oranges or lemons, sugar, spices, and either water or tea, and spirits. As you can see here, some people have had too much punch, way too much punch, but they're having a grand old time. Okay. So the next case looks at more serving and drinking related works. So the two objects, these two objects are in a case together, and they really kind of gave me an opportunity to talk about matching, or in this case, complementary pieces. By the 1700s, Europeans and Americans began requesting matching teawares from Chinese merchants. So they'll all, not exact matches. The teapot and tray are painted with the 100 Antiques pattern. This is one commonly seen on Chinese decorative arts. Despite its name, artisans did not depict 100 objects, but rather kind of a miscellaneous assortment of symbolic items. So here are what a few represent. So we have, the brush holder, which represents learning on the bottom right-hand corner. Coral represents longevity. And then the peonies off to the left represent harmony. Okay, moving on to drinking ware. The artisans who made these enamel cups, which mimic porcelain, painted the interiors white, so the tea drinker could better see and appreciate the color of the brew. Holding only a few spoonfuls of liquid, Chinese teacups encouraged tea drinkers to savor each sip. So these cups are only yay big, just less than 2 inches tall. Also, because tea is generally brewed at lower temperatures in China, the teacups lack handles. Handleless teacups were also easier to stack and transport on ships filled with goods destined for the West. Okay. These covered bowls, which are really beautiful, they're skillfully painted by artisans depicting these wonderful lush landscapes. They could have been used as brewing vessels, much like a teapot, or as cups. So during the Qing dynasty, many tea drinkers preferred to use them as cups, favoring their simplicity and practicality. So the tea leaves were added to the bowl, followed by hot water, and the stronger and more bitter tea leaves sunk to the bottom. The lid remained on top, pushed back only slightly, which allowed the tea to gently flow, as you can see in the bottom right. Of course, lids also prevented heat and stubborn tea leaves from escaping the cup. Okay, next up we have some saucers. So as you know, these are just essentially small plates placed beneath cups, and they became popular in 18th century Europe. Many scholars believed they originated in Turkish coffee houses. And generally, they have several functions, as you might imagine, to provide support, especially before the introduction of handles on cups, to catch spills or drips, to protect surfaces from the heat of the cup, and then to serve as a place to rest a spoon. And the Taft has a number of gorgeous Chinese painted enamels in the collection, with decoration ranging from a colorful display of Buddhist symbols here, which represent wisdom and enlightenment, to figures enjoying the outdoors in peaceful mountainous landscapes. Now, the show does not include information on heavy or kind of serious subjects like the Boston Tea Party or the Opium Wars or contemporary labor or fair trade issues. It's really meant to be on the lighter side and kind of serves as just a general introduction to the history of tea. I do have ideas for shows using these same objects that talk about parties and ceremonies perhaps, and then I can talk about the Boston Tea Party and afternoon tea parties and that sort of thing, because there are just so many topics to explore with tea. So luckily these works are in our collection, and I can bring some more out in the future and just explore other avenues of interest. But this is a quote that is part of the intro panel. Just states, "There is something in the nature of tea that leads us into a world of quiet contemplation of life." So kind of hoping that vibe kind of stays with you as you see the exhibition upstairs. Okay, back to objects. So these two works are in the last case in the exhibition, and I'll just talk about tea and coffee here just for a second, saying that in the early 1700s, Thomas Twining, probably heard of Twining's teas, opened the first tea shop in London, where well-to-do men and women could purchase costly tea leaves to brew at home. Coffee shops, which were then only open to male customers, also sold tea as well as chocolate. Okay, some fun facts for you. Okay. So here's just a picture of Twining's. Still exists. You can go there today. As you can imagine, with these exotic new beverages, which contain varying levels of caffeine, they must have been a welcome addition to the traditional cider or beer that people had been accustomed to drinking in the 1700s. So now that I've thoroughly introduced tea in the exhibition and a tiny bit of coffee, when you're upstairs, it's a nice, funny little thing that I found. I don't have a problem with caffeine. I have a problem without it. When you go upstairs, I'd like for you to vote. So there's, I'm afraid to put this down. There's a case at the very end, and you can, there's a fishbowl where you can pick either a little coffee mug cutout or a teacup cutout, and then you vote for whatever's your favorite. If you can't choose, you can put both in, you know, it's fine. But just participate. It's a fun thing to do, and I'll tally the votes up at the end, and we'll see who comes out ahead. Right now it seems to be coffee, but you know, trying not to hold anything against anyone. Last, we're gonna talk about some non-Chinese works in the collection because it is the holidays and we are decorated for the holidays right now. We decorated on November 4th. So I was telling someone earlier, we decorate early here. So been in the holiday spirit for a while. So I just wanted to talk about our displays. So if you haven't been in the dining room, All Set for Afternoon Tea is up. This is a nod to the parties that Charles and Anna Taft threw at their home annually on New Year's Day. These were called receptions in historical newspapers, and these events always included tea and other delicious beverages and foods. So for example, the second little blurb mentions cold aspics, Virginia hams, eggnog, all those delightful things. And at the bottom, this newspaper clipping does mention the largest of the tea tables. So there were multiple tables placed in the charming dining room, vied in interest with two smaller ones arranged in the crimson-walled library. So that's now the plum parlor. So even though we don't know exactly what these receptions looked like, we do the best to kind of base what we have on display off of newspaper clippings, as well as entertainment and etiquette books at the time, and just try to create something fun for you all. Okay. So between the dining room and the Taft's contemporary tea offerings, we talk a lot about afternoon tea. But where did this term come from? Anna Russell, the 7th Duchess of Bedford, is credited with promoting the ritual of the English ritual of afternoon tea. So between the two main meals of the day, and then that would be breakfast and a very late dinner, she complained of a sinking feeling. I would do the same thing. I would be starving. So to fight off her hunger pangs, she began having afternoon tea and a bite to eat. So thanks to the Duchess, tea time became a fashionable activity, at first enjoyed by the upper class and then across all levels of society. So even today, many take a break in the afternoon for a hot cup of tea or an iced tea, myself included. Okay. And then last, I want to tell you about our tree in the Duncanson foyer. It is called Steeped in Artistry. And the tree on the left was our inspiration. So this is a tree that is put up by the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut. It's where our director used to work. So they would create these palettes, these artist palettes. So a palette was given to a contemporary artist to paint, decorate as they see fit, and then that's what was put on the tree. So we decided to borrow from that idea and kind of make a tea-themed tree. So we put antique teacups on it, and then we had artists. This is a work by Terry Kern. Good job. Paint these teapot-shaped, these wooden ornaments. So right now we have 10 up. We'll do another 10 next year, and this is something we hope to grow in the future. But if you haven't seen it, we think it looks amazing. We're really excited about it. And yeah, it's nice to start a new tradition here at the Taft. Thank you.